Okay, let's have a quick look at the battle for 8th spot on the NRL ladder. It's a very interesting battle. The Dragons currently sit in 8th. They missed the top 8 last year, but 3 of the 4 teams behind them, hunting them down and fighting for that 8th spot, made the top 8 last year, including the Broncos, who made the grand final last year. So that's a very, very interesting dynamic. The Raiders, admittedly, it's been a few years since they made the grand final in 2019, but they've been pretty consistently in the top 8 in recent seasons, although they were expected to potentially miss this year as they are a team going through a transition phase. A lot of veteran players are moving on or retiring, and a much younger core is coming through this team. So the Raiders, as a Raiders fan, I'm not disappointed with where they currently are, just outside, playing games that matter, but in the mix. I'm not disappointed with the Raiders' season. I'm disappointed with some of the performances, but not where they sit in the table. The teams that I am disappointed in are the Broncos, the Dolphins and the Knights. More was expected of these teams. A lot more was expected of these teams this season, and they have disappointed. The Dolphins have been good in patches, but inconsistent. And the Dolphins, their form recently, the last month and a half, has dropped off following the origin period. They've slipped down the ladder. The Broncos had a lengthy losing streak in there as well. Again, around origin period, much similar to a couple of seasons ago, where they completely collapsed towards the end of the season. Last season, there was hope that they could replicate that this year. They haven't been able to do it. The Knights, serially inconsistent over recent seasons. They have flirted at times with being a top 4 side in recent seasons. They went on a good run last season to make the top 8 and actually do pretty well. And there was talk of Adam O'Brien getting the sack last season, held onto his job. I do think if they miss the finals, I think Adam O'Brien could be replaced as head coach. Now, the Dragons, Shane Flanagan, no one expected them to be playing games that matter at this point of the season. They have exceeded expectations. However, let's look at a bit more detail at the situation teams find themselves in. So in 8th place is the Dragons. They have 28 points. It's their points differential which is hurting them, a minus 120. Now, they have performed a lot better than people expected at the beginning of the season. They were expected to be bottom 2, bottom 3. So to be in 8th place at this stage of the season with only a handful of games remaining, I think most Dragon fans would actually be quite happy with that. If they are to go on to make the top 8, that they've massively exceeded expectations. And Shane Flanagan could potentially, in my opinion, get Coach of the Year award. In my opinion. Maybe Serraldo at the Bulldogs, but with the turnaround at the Dragons in the season that Flanagan's been at the club, and there's a lot of people saying he shouldn't have been given the coaching job, or he should have been given the job sooner. And there's a debate about Shane Flanagan and his role within the game, and his history in the game, and his suspensions and his misdeeds at the Sharks. But the job he's done at the Dragons, in my opinion, this season, considering where they were to where they are, pretty fantastic. But defence and consistency is their problem. But they do have the advantage of a 2-point buffer over the teams behind them. And in 9th place is the Broncos. Now, as I said, that points differential is crucial. The Broncos this season, much like 2022, their form from the origin period onwards has been disastrous. In fact, they never really got started well this season. They lost that opening game in Vegas. Bit of a grand final hangover, very similar to what's happening with Parramatta. And if they are to miss, the top 8 questions will be asked of the squad makeup and Kevin Walters. But as things stand, they have 26 points, a plus 2 points differential. Some good wins in recent weeks have helped with the points differential, which it could and probably is going to be crucial come the end of the season in a couple of weeks' time. So that points differential, they're the only one in this battle for 8th spot that has a positive points differential. The Dolphins, they've got 26 points, but they've got a minus 27 points differential. And the Dolphins, much like the Broncos, they've fallen away since the origin period. Their form's dropped off. They've had some good performances, but they're inconsistent as well. Although the Broncos seem to be, turning up to games, the Dolphins, they're dropping away. I think the Dolphins season could be slipping away from them. But again, they're still in with a shot of making the top 8. And that points differential, again, could go in their favour. If the Broncos have a bad defeat, and the Dolphins pick up a win, they could potentially leapfrog the Broncos and the Dragons if the Dragons were to lose their next game because of that points differential. Same with the Broncos. The Dolphins could have a really good win. The Broncos could have a close win, but it's that points differential that is going in Brisbane's favour. The Newcastle Knights are a bit of an outside bet, minus 70 points differential. Again, they were on 26 points. They got lucky. They went on a bit of a run towards the end of last season and made it to the top 8. Went on a good run in the second half of the season. Kalen Ponga and a few other players really stepped up their game and saved Adam O'Brien's job, in my opinion. I think Adam O'Brien was very, very lucky to keep his job at points last season. They go on a bit of run. Their form turns around this season. Inconsistent. They have had a lot of injuries, much like the Broncos, and to be fair, the Dolphins as well. A lot of injuries have plagued these sides, which has impacted their consistency in the halves, their consistency with combinations. But the Knights have been a frustrating team to watch over recent seasons. They can be brilliant, they can be dreadful, and they can be painfully inconsistent. But it's that points differential of a minus 70 that's hurting them. They would need a couple of really big wins and a big point swing with the teams above them have some heavy defeats for things to really go in their favour. But stranger things have happened. But they would need the Broncos and the Dolphins, for example, to have back-to-back 50-point deficits to happen, which is highly unlikely considering how tight the battle is. But the Knights have been criminally inconsistent. But all the sides in this battle for 8th have been good one week. They could all win next weekend, for example, hypothetically, and then lose the following week. It is literally who really wants 8th spot. Does anyone want 8th spot, really? Because the Dolphins were in 8th for a while, or in the top 8. The Knights have been floating around there. The Raiders have been floating around there. The Dragon. These sides have been swapping places all season. It's like, does anyone want the top 8? Now, the Raiders are on 26 points in 12th, minus 131. Now, the Raiders, Jamal Fogarty's been injured for a large portion of the season. If he's not injured, they probably are above the Dragons. Their defence is a big concern, but against Penrith yesterday, their defence turned up and won them the game. And as a Raiders fan, it was really positive to see. Good bounce back after a bad defeat. But when they have defeats, some of their defeats are bad. But when they win close. They win close games. But when they lose, they tend to ship points badly, and that's hurting them. So the Raiders are the outside bet. But if they can play their remaining games like they played against Penrith and win their remaining games, anything's possible. They've got to win every game. And they've got to win every game and hope the teams above them have heavy defeats. But as I say, with the way the season's gone, it's so unpredictable. So the Dragons have that 2-point buffer, and the Dragons have proven they can beat a top 4 side. They beat the Melbourne Storm in Melbourne. That's really hard to do. And so they prove they can do it, and then they follow up that win in Melbourne with a couple of iffy performances. Brisbane, suddenly they found a bit of winning form. Adam Reynolds has come back in the side following injury. They look better with Reynolds in the side, although there are times where Reynolds doesn't look his best. They found a bit of form, but they went on that lengthy losing streak. And there have been questions where things do go wrong for the Broncos. Heads can drop and they lose a bit of focus and a bit of confidence, and then, they can fall apart. Is it a mental side of things for the Broncos? Are they still feeling the effects of 2022 when they were one of the top sides going into the Origin period and they fell away and finished 9th? Are they still feeling the effects of the grand final defeat at the end of last season? But they've been very inconsistent this season. Again, injuries have hampered the Broncos, but they are playing catch-up. But that points differential goes in their favour. Dolphins, it's a repeat of last season. They fell away in the second half of last season, and they're losing more than they're winning at the moment. But the Dolphins are only in their second season, so for them to still be playing games that matter at this stage of the season, I think they have improved on last year, and they're going to continue to make improvements going forward. As I say, only in their second full season in the NRL, but they were expected to take that next step. Their points differential isn't terrible. It's better than the Dragons. It's better than the teams behind them in the Knights and the Raiders. But the Broncos are in a much stronger position on the points differential and recent form with how things are trending. The Broncos are trending upwards. The Dolphins seem to be stagnating, trending downwards. The Knights, I fear if they don't make the top 8, Adam O'Brien's job is done. I think he needs the team to make the top 8. But they're just too inconsistent. They're good one game, terrible the next. Much like the Raiders, too inconsistent. But the Raiders, as a Raiders fan, we expected them to be on the edge of the 8, potentially, playing games that matter at this stage of the season. Transitional season. The teams above them were expected to be better, apart from the Dragons. The 3 teams above the Raiders were expected all to be top 8 sides. And the fact they're outside the 8 looking in says they have underperformed. I think the Dragons have overperformed. I think Dragons fans, wherever they finish this season, can be very, very happy with the progress made at the club under Shane Flanagan, and people are still debating the pros and cons of having Shane Flanagan as head coach and his time at Cronulla and the aftermath, some of the negative controversies that came out of that, his lengthy coaching ban where he wasn't allowed to be a head coach, where he was deregistered, and the issues surrounding Flanagan as a coach, even though he has won a premiership. But there is no doubt he has made this side better, and players are playing better under him than under previous coaches. And the team has put more performances together. People were predicting, a lot of media were predicting the Dragons would still be in the bottom 2, bottom 3 this season. So they've massively exceeded expectations. If they do make the top 8, I think Shane Flanagan potentially deserves consideration for Coach of the Year. So there we go. There's a brief look at how things currently stand. I think if the Raiders can play like they played against Penrith in their remaining games, there is an outside miracle chance they could do it. I'm not sold on the Knights and the Dolphins being consistent enough. The Broncos seem to start now be trending in the right direction. The Dragons, however, one good win can completely change the dynamic if the teams below them lose. If the Dragons can get that one good win, it changes the dynamic. But then if the Raiders win and the teams above them lose, and the Dragons lose by enough points, the Raiders could suddenly be in the top 8. So this is a very fluid situation. But as I say, the teams out chasing down the Dragons, all of them have underperformed from where they were last season. The Raiders were a little bit expected, but the other 3 teams in the Knights, Dolphins and Broncos were expected to be a lot better than they actually are. But it also shows the competitiveness of a league with a salary cap. People go, the salary cap doesn't work because your Melbourne Storms, your Sydney Roosters, your Penrith Panthers are consistently in the top 4. But look at the sides that are involved in this fight for 8th spot. 3 of them were in the top 8 last year. One of them made a grand final and was in the top 4 last year. So it does sort of show the competitiveness of the NRL and the salary cap sort of working, if you could argue that. But there we go. There's a brief look at the battle for 8th spot on the NRL ladder this season. It's hotting up, a couple of games left. There's bye rounds in there for teams, which will impact the standings a little bit. But it's the points differential that's really stunning. The fact that only one team involved in this scrap for 8th spot has a positive points differential says to me, even though the Dragons are 2 points clear, the Broncos potentially advantage their corner. Be interesting to see. There are some coaches under pressure at the Knights and at the Broncos. We know Wayne Bennett's moving on. We know Ricky Stewart's signed that contract extension at the Raiders. They're quite a stably run team. Flanagan's new at the Dragons, so Brian at the Knights under pressure and Kelly Walters at the Broncos under pressure should those teams miss the top 8. There will be post-season reviews. From me for now, thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comments section below. And I'll have some more content for you guys very, very soon.